Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022. We're past the double 22 date, so safely past there. No attack by the 22s, whatever they may be. And on to the rest of the week. Well, let's see. Our Tuesday, our ordinary and yet extraordinary Tuesday guest, that is to say, our routine, our usual, our happily expected Tuesday guest, Joan McCarter, absent today, and I guess everyone is to, we hope that thoughts and prayers will be effective today. You can at least send good doggo-type thoughts. She's got a dog on the way to the vet this morning for some extensive testing, and so it stands in the way of being able to join us early this morning, all the way from the Pacific Northwest, no less. Always a tough gig as it is, but just made a little tougher when somebody needs a little extra care at the docks. So anyway, good luck to Annie the dog, good friend, I guess, and compatriot, all the collection of dogs we have on the show. Two, both with names that begin with A. And so everybody who listens to the show has to change their dog's names to something that starts with A to stay in theme. I don't know what the theme is, but it makes it easier to remember. Anyway, onward to the rest of the show. Lots happening today. Lots developing in the Donald Trump Pervalago records seizure case. A lot of writing being done, both by reporters covering the story and by Trump's, ostensibly Trump's lawyers, who have filed a motion to, or requesting that a special master be appointed. I guess they must have read in the newspaper at some point or seen on the news that when Rudy Giuliani had his office raided and his communications devices seized, there was a special master appointed to try to sort through the information that fell into the possession of the FBI on account of this search of his office, in an effort to separate out things that might be, one, irrelevant, two, privileged in some way, whether by attorney-client privilege or any other applicable privilege, and separate out from that those things that could be used or they hoped could be used as evidence in whatever case they were pursuing, if they're even still pursuing such a case. We don't even know. At any rate, they must have heard that news and said, that's something we can waste time with here for Donald Trump and the documents seized from Mar-a-Lago, because they're documents and because I'll assert executive privilege over them, even though I'm no longer the executive involved. The executive privilege, of course, belongs to the president, and he's not the president. So you got problems right off the bat there. But in this case, I don't know. I'm not certain what they think a special master will do for them, and they may not think a special master will do anything. If they're analyzing the situation normally, they may also just be saying, this is really just to be in court and argue about things and hopefully delay stuff and cast doubt on the ability of the government to prosecute Trump or anyone else for the possession of these documents, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll file for a special master, even though it's just not applicable. There's no reason to have a special master. He's not the executive. He can't assert executive privilege over these documents. I suppose he could, I don't know how. No, I can't even think of what other privileges he would come up with. But at any rate, he's filed for this, and the filing is a mess. And for whatever reason, the computer system that they use to alert people and allow them to the fact that there's been a filing and then allow them to find the filing and read through it once they become public documents, listed this as listed Trump appearing pro se, as they say, as his own attorney, which was astonishing, but I think is actually wrong. For whatever reason, I don't know why that listed it, but it was certainly a shock to see that. I mean, they were talking the other day about the fact that nobody would take his cases because, well, one, they're loser cases. Two, he's a loser. And three, nobody thought they would get paid at the end of this thing. So, but I didn't think it had extended quite to the point where literally no one would represent him and he'd have to represent himself. But I think that might have been an erroneous entry, or perhaps necessitated because it looks, I guess, I don't know. Empty Wheel was talking about this yesterday, and it looked like, although by the end of the day, it looked to me like Evan Corcoran, one of the attorneys who was on hand during the search, along with Christina Bobb from the One America News Network, who were on hand for the search and were involved in handing over that documentation to the FBI, saying that to the best of their knowledge, the documents turned over to the FBI on their visit to Mar-a-Lago in June in service of the grand jury subpoena, of course. Just a nice, pleasant afternoon visit. The documents turned over to the FBI at that time represented all of the classified documents being held and all of the material claimed by the National Archives and Records Administration. And then, of course, it turns out that it wasn't even close to all of the documents, because then they came and searched the place and removed another, 10, 12 boxes and another 100 classified documents. I think the tally now, but according to the reporting, is up to 300 classified documents seized from or turned over to the FBI at some point from Donald Trump. And no reason to believe that that's the end of it either. I suppose there could be other things hidden in other places, in other of Trump's homes, in other of Trump's, grave sites, if you will. But at any rate, it's very interesting. So now they're asserting this is executive privilege, which is a problem because he's not the executive, and the executive privilege belongs to Joe Biden, and I don't know how he feels about extending it to Trump, especially in service of hiding his violation of the Espionage Act. Another couple of reminders about the nature, again, of the Espionage Act. One, that it's a strict liability crime, and everybody seems to be ignoring that in the reporting, generally speaking. Our good Twitter friend and friend of the show, Rusty Dusty 55, Russ Stauffer, has written, and with the question regarding what I think this is the photo that accompanies Maggie Haberman's latest. Trump had more than 300 classified documents at Pervalago. She, of course, calls it Mar-a-Lago. And he asks, so why do all the media discussions ignore strict liability and instead talk about intent? I still don't really know, but it must be just that strict liability crime is just kind of boring to cover. It happened, and that's it. And everybody wants to know what the intent is. It's interesting because we want to be able to say he was selling the documents to the Saudis, selling the documents to the Russians. It would be nice to have that kind of confirmation that he was exactly the kind of scumbag everybody thought he was. And I guess everybody's waiting for that, but it doesn't matter. With respect to this particular set of crimes, the possession of this national security information. I think they're finally getting the idea. Kash Patel clings to the idea that the fact that the stuff was declassified, allegedly, is somehow important. It is not, but that's their only defense, or Kash Patel's only defense anyway, at this point. But on the other hand, there's also the intent question, and everybody seems hung up on that, even though all that's required to establish that the crime's been committed is unauthorized possession of these documents. They had them because they served a search warrant and found them, and that's all there is to it. Your house? Yes. These papers were in it, right? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Goodbye. You're now guilty of violating the Espionage Act. This assertion of claim of executive privilege is similarly inapposite, as far as I can tell. What good does the executive privilege do? What is it that you can use the executive privilege for when you're talking about either classified documents or privileged documents? Right? You fight about them in court, and if you win, and win on your claims of executive privilege. How? I don't know. He's not the executive, whatever. But if you win on your claims of executive privilege, that means what? You can't look at, discuss, introduce as evidence the contents, the substance of the documents, right? We can't read them. We can't find out what he was trying to sell to the Saudis, whatever you think his motive is. Except, as we learned, motive doesn't matter. Similarly, who cares what's in the documents? I mean, I would like to know so that, again, for entertainment value, so we know exactly what he was trying to sell. It's important to find that out for different reasons, but for the purposes of these crimes, these Espionage Act violations, not only does the motive not matter, the content of the documents don't really matter, except for the fact that they were classified. Or rather, not classified, but rather that they were national security information, and, of course, that they were the property of the National Archives and Records Administration. So classified, unclassified doesn't matter. Possession is the only thing that matters. And how does applying executive privilege undermine the case that's made by the possession of these documents, right? If you possess the documents, it doesn't really matter what they say, except insofar as the fact that they contain national security information implicates you under the Espionage Act. I suppose you could argue, well, how can you claim that these documents contain national security information if you're not allowed to discuss the contents of the documents because of executive privilege? But that's not exactly the way the executive privilege will work here. What's privileged is the substance of the documents, not their existence. You can't claim executive privilege over the acknowledgement of the existence of the documents. It doesn't work, right? Do you claim executive privilege in these documents? Yes, I do. Well, then they must exist, right? Because if they don't, then you can't claim executive privilege over them. You make an interesting point. So I don't care what for this purpose, I don't care what the content is. You want to privilege that? I won't let you. I'll fight you all the way, because eventually we're going to charge you with some crimes that it's going to be important that we have the content of the document, or at least a description of the content of the document. But I don't think executive privilege helps in the way that they think here. It's a possession crime. Like, Trump can't claim executive privilege over the pile of cocaine in his desk, right? You're under arrest for possession of cocaine. No, I'm not. I claim executive privilege on that powder there. Well, there's no substance. Well, it's a controlled substance, but what I mean is there's no content involved in the pile of cocaine, right? There's no state secret that it reveals other than that the president is a coke fiend, which, is problematic and all, and I'm sure they'd like to cover that up, but it's possession crime, right? So that's it. The fact that he's even saying, I want my cocaine back, is confession enough. So anyway, there was that. There was other problems with the filing. It might be of some interest to read the filing itself, although, I don't know whether that's really a good radio per se, but it is kind of a remarkable document. Others have parsed through it. We can rely on their reading of it, perhaps. That's probably the best way to approach it. Well, let's see. There's an awful lot out there, a lot of our writing on it. Politico has something to say about it. New York Times has plenty to say about it. Washington Post has plenty to say about it. And somehow the Politico one is the only one that made it to Pocket. So we'll start with them and take a look. Documents recovered at Pervolago. I'm just taking license here. I wish Politico would do this, but they haven't. But documents recovered at Pervolago were among government's most classified, a letter shows. That reminds me that one of the things I saw retweeted this morning, maybe by Kyle Cheney, whose piece we're about to read, although I'm not certain. No, it was Aaron Blake. Even better. Although Aaron Blake not retweeting with it the Washington Post piece, but the Politico piece that we're about to read, and maybe this comes from the article, apparently a quote from Congressman Chris Stewart, a Republican congressman, quoted 2 weeks ago Yeah, I just learned of his existence right here, right now. But the quote is, I mean, if he had actual special access programs, do you know how extraordinarily sensitive that is? If that were actually at his residence, that would be a problem. Well, listener, the documents that Trump had were, in fact, special access documents, it appears. So that sounds like a problem, and I don't know how well executive privilege works here. And if there's no executive privilege, what would be the job of the special master? You just have a person standing around. I think it'd be pretty cool to be able to call yourself special master. That's possibly true and interesting and fun. But other than that, I don't see what the job would entail. All right. Now over to the Politico piece covering this. Documents recovered at Mar-a-Lago were among government's most classified, letter shows. In the letter, posted on a Trump-aligned journalist's website, we'll see which one it is, maybe John Solomon, the National Archives pushed back on Trump's privilege claims. All right, let's go see what's going on here. The National Archives found more than 700, pages, 700 pages of classified material in 300 separate documents, apparently, short documents in the Trump administration, including special access program materials, some of the most highly classified secrets in government, in 15 boxes recovered from Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in January, according to correspondence between the National Archivist and his legal team. I love all these secret designations. I think that they need to recalibrate such that top secret is once again the top level of secret, but apparently there's like 100 things over top secret now, which is amounts to like double secret, probation secret. I'm not a classification person. I don't think I'm familiar with special access program materials, but I guess we'll find out something about what that is. But they had like secret compartmentalized information and I'm learning all the lingo. No, I'm not. I'm reading all the lingo, but I'm not remembering it. The May 10th letter, posted late Monday on the website of John Solomon, a conservative journalist that's iffy, and one of Trump's authorized liaisons to the National Archives to review papers from his presidency, showed that NARA and federal investigators had grown increasingly alarmed about potential damage to national security, caused by the warehousing of these documents at Spy, Mar-a-Lago, Moss Isley, what have you, as well as by Trump's resistance to sharing them with the FBI. Share them with foreign nationals, just not the FBI. These records included 700 pages of classified material, according to the letter sent by National Archivist Deborah Wall to Trump's attorney, Evan Corcoran, and it doesn't include records recovered by the Justice Department and FBI during a June meeting and the August 11th search at the Mar-a-Lago premises. Wall's letter describes earlier correspondence in which Trump's team objected to disclosing the contents of the 15 boxes to the FBI. As you are no doubt aware, NARA had ongoing communications with the former president's representatives throughout 2021 about what appeared to be missing presidential records, which resulted in the transfer of 15 boxes of records to NARA in January of 2022, Wall wrote. In its initial review of materials within those boxes, NARA identified items marked as classified national security information, up to the level of top secret, and including sensitive compartmented information and special access program materials. Oh well. NARA aides did not immediately respond to a request for comment on the letter, and Corcoran could not immediately be reached. The correspondence shows that even though NARA retrieved the 15 boxes in January, Justice Department and FBI investigators didn't see their contents until May, after extended negotiations with Trump's representatives. Why, even? I don't know. But just time waster, I guess. The letter also shows that in the interim, DOJ asked President Joe Biden to authorize NARA to provide the records to investigators, despite an effort by Trump to claim executive privilege over the records. So Trump claims executive privilege, but he's not president, and everybody knows that turns on the current president saying, yes, okay, I will, in fact, and not I too, but I, in his stead, will make a claim of executive privilege, which sometimes happens between presidents and ex-presidents, but less likely here. But that this is the exact opposite of protecting these things, really, by executive privilege. Trump claims it. Not only does Biden make no move to invoke executive privilege, but the federal government instead moves to, how did they put it here? The letter also shows it in the interim. DOJ asked President Joe Biden to authorize NARA to provide the records to investigators. So, I mean, Trump is invoking executive privilege not to protect the information from, being released to the general public or something like that. He's only protecting himself, presumably. But he's asking for executive privilege. Not only is the current president not agreeing to extend executive privilege, but the DOJ is asking, don't hide them at least from the investigators. No. So the advice to the current president who holds the power is, nope, there's no privilege here and you shouldn't invoke it. All right, where do we leave off? Wall indicated that she had rejected Trump's claim because of the significance of the documents to national security. NARA informed the Department of Justice about that discovery, which prompted the department to ask the president to request that NARA provide the FBI with access to the boxes at issue so that the FBI and others in the intelligence community could examine them, Wall wrote. This, too, actually is developing as an interesting wrinkle all by itself, right? The documents are now back in the hands of the executive branch, and Trump is attempting to invoke executive privilege over them, to withhold them from the executive branch by executive authority, even though he's not the executive, and that the rightful owner of the documents is the executive branch. It gets a little weird. Anyway, let's see. Yes, Biden, according to Wall, then delegated the privilege decision to her. Oh, well, that makes things easy for her. In consultation with the Justice Department. Okay, I can invoke privilege on Trump's behalf if it's necessary. The thing to do here, instead of sitting, I'll sit by the phone and wait, for the documents to be sent over, and then I'll call you if I think they should be privileged. I will designate the archivist in consultation with the DOJ. If the two of you think it should be privileged for some national security reason, let me know. Or in this case, in fact, you can make the decision. I delegate the decision to you. Wall noted that typical restrictions on access to presidential records carve out an exception for incumbent administrations. And she described an April 29th letter from DOJ's National Security Division describing their pursuit of these documents. There are important national security interests in the FBI and others in the intelligence community getting access to these materials. Access to the materials is not only necessary for purposes of our ongoing criminal investigation, but the executive branch must also conduct an assessment of the potential damage resulting from the apparent manner in which these materials were stored and transported, and take any necessary remedial steps, according to the DOJ letter. Accordingly, we are seeking immediate access to these materials so as to facilitate the necessary assessments that need to be conducted within the executive branch, which could be anything from let's find out if this is circulating on the internet anywhere to let's dust them for fingerprints and see if any known foreign nationals and spies or foreign assets have handled these things, or we don't know what the relationship of these people who handled the documents to foreign governments may be. We just want to start questioning them based on the fact that they had these things in their hand. I don't know. Wall indicated that archives had notified Trump on April 12th of the FBI's urgency to review the documents, but delayed transmitting them at the behest of Trump's team. So the archives have actually, throughout this process, apparently been going out of their way to honor the possibility that Trump is actually handling all of these documents, despite the fact that, the initial crime of having them in the first place that he can't deny. but handle them sensitively, and I don't know. I guess he would claim appropriately after their seizure. In other words, he's said that this is very sensitive stuff for other reasons, and you shouldn't reveal the contents, and I'm asserting privilege. And in the absence of a ruling that says that's stupid, you don't have anything even approaching privilege on that, the archives have been saying, all right, well, we'll hold them close and move slowly, which is much more than he's really entitled to. It has now been 4 weeks since we first informed you of our intent to provide the FBI access to the boxes so that it and others in the intelligence community can conduct their reviews, Wall wrote. Notwithstanding the urgency conveyed by the Department of Justice and the reasonable extension afforded to the former president, your April 29th letter asks for additional time for you to review the materials in the boxes in order to ascertain whether any specific document is subject to privilege, and then to consult with the former president so that he may personally make any decisions to assert a claim of constitutionally based privilege. Wall said she consulted with the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel and had decided not to honor that request. The question in this case is not a close one, she wrote. The executive branch here is seeking access to records belonging to and in the custody of the federal government itself, not only in order to investigate whether these records were handled in an unlawful manner, but also, as the National Security Division explained, to conduct an assessment of the potential damage resulting from the apparent manner in which these materials were stored and transported, and take any necessary and remedial steps. Okay, that's actually the end of the Politico piece, but it poses, I think, all the problems that we brought up in our quick preview of the thing, how you assert executive privilege by not being the executive over documents that belong to the executive branch and are in the hands of the executive branch. I do not know.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think next, I wanted to get to Marcy's parsing through what happened here, but I think it requires perhaps at least partial setup by looking at the New York Times version of reportage here. Trump had more than 300 classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. The National Archives found more than 150 sensitive documents when it got its first batch of material from the former president in January, helping to explain the Justice Department's urgent response. This is the piece that I credited earlier to Maggie Haberman, but of course she has considerable help here in putting this together. So on the byline as well are Jody Cantor, Adam Goldman, and Ben Protis. People we hear from quite often on these things. The initial batch of documents retrieved by the National Archives from former President Donald J. Trump in January included more than 150 marked as classified. Not that it matters. A number that ignited intense concern at the Justice Department and helped trigger the criminal investigation that led FBI agents to swoop into Mar-a-Lago this month, seeking to recover more. Multiple people briefed on the matter said, and pretty much everybody in America now says. In total, the government has recovered more than 300 documents with classified markings from Mr. Trump since he left office. The people said that first batch of documents returned in January, another set provided by Mr. Trump's aides to the Justice Department in June, and the material seized by the FBI in the search this month. The previously unreported volume of sensitive material found in the former president's possession in January helps explain why the Justice Department moved so urgently to hunt down any other further classified materials he might have. And that's considered urgency, I guess. They find this stuff in January, and then by June, they're ready to take some more. And then after that, by August, they're ready to search for even more. So, I mean, that's, I guess, all the dispatch and urgency the DOJ can muster against. I guess they could probably move with greater dispatch, but they've been slowed down along the way by people giving serious consideration to the idea that Donald Trump might have some actual legal grounds to assert a privilege of some sort, which they really should have sorted out a lot faster. But the fact that it took this long to get a hold of all these documents is really testament to how much foot dragging Trump is capable of doing and how far out of their way to honor that foot dragging the federal government is going, so that they should not be accused of being jackbooted thugs kicking in the door without notice and snatching up items and generally imposing tyranny, which, of course, is exactly what they're being accused of, even though they took all the time in the world. They let Trump take all the time in the world before they got fed up and finally just took the damn stuff. Anyway, the article continues, and to the extent to which such a large number of highly sensitive documents remained at Mar-a-Lago for months, even as the department sought the return of all material that should have been left in government custody when Trump left office, suggested to officials that the former president or his aides had been cavalier in handling it, not fully forthcoming with investigators, or both. Oh my, I mean, imagine being both cavalier and not fully forthcoming, or actually just obstructing the investigation entirely, but not mentioned here. And that's one of Marcy's chief complaints, which we'll see in just a few minutes. The specific nature of the sensitive material that Trump took from the White House remains unclear, and it doesn't really matter for purposes of these statutes, again. But the 15 boxes Mr. Trump turned over to the archives in January, nearly a year after he left office, by the way, included documents from the CIA, the National Security Agency, and the FBI, spanning a variety of topics of national security interest, a person briefed on the matter said. Trump went through the boxes himself in late 2021, according to multiple people briefed on his efforts, before turning them over. The highly sensitive nature, so he knows exactly what's in there. Well, he has some idea of what the markings are anyway. The highly sensitive nature of some of the material in the boxes prompted archives officials to refer the matter to the Justice Department, which within months had convened a grand jury investigation. Aides to Mr. Trump turned over a few dozen additional sensitive documents during a visit to Mar-a-Lago by Justice Department officials in early June. At the conclusion of the search this month, officials left with 26 boxes, including 11 sets of material marked as classified, comprising scores of additional documents. One set had the highest level of classification, top secret / sensitive compartmented information. Why then the complaint about, if he had special programs, I don't know what that is. Maybe that's not a classification designation, but something else, also very important, and that the guy knew the terminology, so that becomes the important thing. The Justice Department investigation is continuing, suggesting that officials are not certain whether they have recovered all the presidential records that Trump took with him from the White House. Yeah, I think that's the obvious conclusion, right? Even after the extraordinary decision by the FBI to execute a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago on August 8th, investigators have sought additional surveillance footage from the club, even a second round of it apparently, according to people familiar with this goings-on here. It was the second such demand for the club's security tapes, said the people familiar with the matter, and underscored that authorities are still scrutinizing how the classified documents were handled by Mr. Trump and his staff before the search. I imagine, by the way, one of the things that they're probably looking for is cuts in the tape, where I wonder whether Trump's team on site at Mar-a-Lago ever thought they were getting wise to this stuff and saying, well, if I'm going to remove these documents from this room, turn off the security cameras while I go in and out so that there's no video record of it. But it should be apparent that the record was turned on and off, and that'll be damning enough by itself. But they won't know who to damn for it, I guess. But I don't know. Maybe they weren't even that thoughtful about it. A spokesman for Mr. Trump did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Nobody responded for comment. Fine, moving on. Trump's allies insist that the president had a standing order, and that's enclosed in scare quotes, to declassify material that left the Oval Office for the White House residence, and claimed that the General Services Administration, not Mr. Trump's staff, packed the boxes with the documents. No documentation has come to light confirming that Mr. Trump declassified the material, and the potential crimes cited by the Justice Department in seeking the search warrant for Mar-a-Lago would not hinge, thank you, on the classification status of the documents. That finally makes it into print. By the way, the likelihood that General Services Administration staff came into the Oval Office and was told, yeah, pick up all those classified papers and put them in boxes and ship them to Mar-a-Lago, and that they picked these things up and they were stamped top secret, and they said, yeah, sure. Because GSA people, what would we know about classification of documents and how to handle them, right? I mean, they do know those rules. The idea that they would just pack up things like that, I mean, now, the only way they would pack that up is then if Trump or someone from the staff is standing by saying, oh yeah, don't bother with all those things that are stamped top secret, or rather, I mean, do bother with them. Give us the documents. Just don't pay any attention to the top secret designation. The president has declassified all of those things. And I don't really know what the state of the law is with respect to briefing GSA employees, if that's who really did this stuff, did the packing, you know, and we have every reason to believe that that's a lie because it came from Trump's camp. But I don't know that they would accept somebody's word. Oh, yeah, the president totally declassified that stuff. Don't worry about it, pack it up. So it seems unlikely to me that the GSA really did do the packing. But that's a dodge and probably going to be proven a lie at some point soon. No documentation has come to light, of course, about the declassification, which would be important. National Archives officials spent much of 2021 trying to get back material from Mr. Trump and hide from the pandemic that he unleashed. After learning that roughly 24 boxes of presidential records materials had been lingering in the White House residence for several months. Under the Presidential Records Act, all official material remains government property and has to be provided to the archives at the end of a president's term. Among the items that were missing were Trump's original letters from North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un and the note that President Barack Obama had left Mr. Trump before he left office. Two former White House officials who had been designated as among Mr. Trump's representatives with the archives received calls and tried to facilitate the documents' return. Mr. Trump resisted those calls, describing the boxes of documents as, quote, mine, according to 3 advisors familiar with his comments. Soon after beginning their investigation earlier this year, Justice Department officials came to believe that there were additional classified documents that needed to be collected. In May, after conducting a series of witness interviews, the department issued a subpoena for the return of the remaining classified material, according to people familiar with the episode. On June 3rd, Jay Bratt, the chief of the counterespionage section of the National Security Division of the Justice Department, went to Mar-a-Lago to meet with 2 of Mr. Trump's lawyers, Evan Corcoran and Christina Bobb, and retrieve any remaining classified material to satisfy the subpoena. Corcoran went through the boxes himself, which he probably shouldn't have done, doesn't have the clearance to do, to identify classified material beforehand, according to 2 people familiar with his efforts. Mr. Corcoran showed Mr. Bratt the basement storage room where, he said, the remaining material had been kept. Well, I mean, a number of difficulties arising here, and I think Marcy discusses those in her piece. But, I mean, Corcoran and Bob, although they're the attorneys handling it, they don't have the security clearance to, like, go through this material. What's interesting is they'll probably try to claim, I wasn't reading the substance of the material. I was simply looking to see whether there was a stamp on it that said top secret to see, because I figured, all right, if it says top secret on it or something like that, classified, it's probably responsive to this subpoena, and I'll give it back because I don't have any means, for grabbing it or sticking it down my pants or hiding it in any way. So I will turn it over. But, I mean, you're not qualified to conduct this review. So the fact that you now have come into possession of this classified material is itself probably another violation of the Espionage Act all by itself. And you guys are either now co-conspirators to the violation of the Espionage Act, or at least witnesses to Trump's violation of it. I mean, at a minimum, we can establish you say, like, you admit that you went through these boxes, right? Yes, but only in an effort to try to satisfy the subpoena. Okay, granted. But one, you're coming into possession of these documents is a violation of the Espionage Act. It's not a violation of the Espionage Act for you to give the documents back to the federal government. So the good news there. But the fact that you went through them, the fact that they were there for you to go through also, well, it kind of proves that Trump was in violation of the Espionage Act by having them in his house. So I know that you are filing all these statements to show how cooperative you were with the FBI, but P.S., they're both, it also makes you a co-conspirator and dooms Trump on these strict liability crimes. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. Mr. Corcoran showed Mr. Bratt the basement storage room where he said the remaining material had been kept in violation of the Espionage Act. Trump briefly came to see the investigators during the visit. He probably thought he was going to sweet talk them. Yeah, you don't have to charge me for anything. I'm a good guy. Hey, you're just doing your job, whatever. Mr. Bratt and the agents who joined him were given a sheaf of classified material, according to two people familiar with the meeting. Mr. Corcoran then drafted a statement which Ms. Bob, who is said to be the custodian of the documents, signed. It asserted that, to the best of her knowledge, all classified material that had been there had been returned, according to two people familiar with the statement. So Christina Bob is the one on the hook for claiming to have returned all the material, and then when the FBI finds out months later that they didn't return all the material, they would naturally turn to Christina Bob and say, but you certified that it was. Well, to the best of my knowledge. Were you in any position to have knowledge? This is another interesting violation here, by the way. Why were you in position to have knowledge of the whereabouts of classified material? And the answer is, well, because I was designated the custodian of Trump's personal papers. Okay, but do you see the problem here? It's not Trump's personal papers. They are NARA archive documents. That Trump was in possession of them is a violation of the Espionage Act. You say you've got a legal document that declares you the custodian of these things. Guess what that means? That means you're in possession of these things. You also have violated the Espionage Act. And you're a witness to Trump's violation of the Espionage Act and a co-conspirator in it as well by allowing yourself to be designated the custodian of papers that he held illegally. That's stupid. On top of which, you've stupidly signed a document that says, well, we've given you all the evidence against me being in violation of the Espionage Act and lying about it. That's not going to go very well. Mr. Corcoran, and you will not believe this, Ms. Bob did not respond, either one of them, to requests for comment. Soon after that visit, investigators who were interviewing several people in Mr. Trump's circle about the documents came to believe that there were other presidential records that had not been turned over, according to people familiar with the matter. On June 22nd, the Justice Department subpoenaed the Trump Organization for Mar-a-Lago's security footage, which included a well-trafficked hallway outside the storage area, the people said. The club had surveillance footage going back 60 days for some areas of the property, stretching back to late April of this year. While much of the footage showed hours of club employees walking through the busy corridor, many of them, by the way, are foreign nationals of Eastern European extraction, just in case you were wondering. Some of it raised concerns for investigators, according to people familiar with the matter. It revealed people moving boxes in and out, and in some cases appearing to change the containers that some documents were held in. The footage also showed other parts of the property. In seeking a second round of security footage, the Justice Department wants to review tapes for the weeks leading up to the August 8th search. Federal officials have indicated that their initial goal has been to secure any classified documents Trump was holding at Mar-a-Lago, a pay-for membership club where there is little control over who comes in as guests. It remains to be seen whether anyone will face criminal charges stemming from the investigation, even though it's a strict liability crime. And I can tell you right now, who's guilty of it because of the nature of the crime. The combination of witness interviews and the initial security footage led Justice Department officials to begin drafting a request for a search warrant. The people familiar with the matter said the FBI agents who conducted the search found the additional documents in the storage area in the basement of Mar-a-Lago, as well as in a closet in Mr. Trump's office, the people said. Okay. Mr. Trump's allies have attacked the law enforcement agencies, accusing the investigators of being partisan. The intense public interest has now spurred a legal fight to see the search warrant's underlying affidavit. On Monday, a federal magistrate issued a formal order directing the Justice Department to send him, under seal, proposed redactions to the affidavit underlying the warrant used to search Mar-a-Lago by Thursday, accompanied by a memo explaining its justifications. In the order, the judge, Bruce Reinhart, said he was inclined to release portions of the sealed affidavit, but wanted to wait until he saw the government's redactions before making a decision. That's okay. So that's where we stand right now. Let's use the time remaining before the second break to take a look at Marcy Wheeler's look at this look. At what was going on at Mar-a-Lago. Mastering Obstruction. This piece is titled, Two of Trump's Attorneys May Be Witnesses or Suspects. And guess what? It's Christina Bobb and Evan Corcoran. The New York Times, she complains immediately. That's what she does. And we love it. And we love her for it. New York Times published a 1,700-word story on the investigation into Donald Trump that didn't include the word obstruction once. It implied, though the reporting wasn't entirely clear, that the government has already found about 100 additional classified documents among the boxes seized on August 8th, on top of the 200 already identified from the boxes turned over in January and the meeting with Jay Bratt on June 3rd. The Washington Post published a 2,100-word story on the investigation that likewise failed to mention the word obstruction, and that obstruction was one of the crimes for which the DOJ believed they'd find evidence at Mar-a-Lago. That's the reason why you might mention it. The Washington Post story treated the ridiculous filing of Trump's attorneys, including Evan Corcoran, submitted yesterday as if it was a serious legal endeavor. We might be interested in reading that, or maybe I think Marcy will cover it adequately for us. You cannot understand several of the things that appear in these stories without considering the legal import of the fact that after Corcoran and Christina Bobb, who is described alternately in Trump's filing on page 5 as the custodian of the records and on page 8 as one of 3 attorneys in the general area who showed up to observe the search, jointly signed a declaration stating that there were no more classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. The FBI found 100 more classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. That's not great, although I lost track of the way that sentence was constructed. You can't understand several of the things that appear in the stories without considering the legal import of the fact that after Corcoran and Christina Bobb jointly signed a declaration stating there were no more classified documents, the FBI found more classified documents. That's the basic breakdown of it. Here's how the New York Times described it, and we already have read that. She quotes the part about Jay Bratt coming to conduct a review. Corcoran shows Bratt the storage room. Trump comes in to visit. Bratt and the agents who joined him were given a sheaf of classified material and then given the document that said that you've got everything there is. Since Corcoran and Bobb created that declaration, and particularly since the FBI seized evidence proving it was not true, that is, the statement that you've got everything that we have or that we have knowledge of. I guess if it really says, to the best of my knowledge, they might have some wiggle room. But anyway, once now that the FBI has seized additional evidence, meaning that the declaration wasn't true, They became likely witnesses or co-conspirators in this investigation, both in the obstruction side of the investigation, because they might know whether classified documents were deliberately hidden for Bratt's visit, and who knew that the declaration to be a lie. And they also, of course, would be liable under the Espionage Act side, because 18 U.S. Code 793 has a conspiracy provision. So they could be co-conspirators on that. So when Bob arrived during the search on August 8th and, quote, requested the ability to enter the mansion in order to observe what the FBI agents were doing, the FBI would have viewed her as a potential co-conspirator in obstruction of an Espionage Act investigation. And when Corcoran signed a filing demanding that the court, a different court, by the way, than the one that approved the warrant, appoint a special master who will work with lawyers from both sides to review the document, and also demanding that he and Trump's other lawyers get a detailed list of what was seized, the FBI would view him as a potential co-conspirator in obstruction of an Espionage Act investigation. And here from the filing, asking for the special master, a quote, Movement, that would be Trump, requests that this court appoint a special master pursuant to Rule 53A1B of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure and this court's inherent equitable powers and authority. This step, which the government itself has requested in cases involving the seizure of privileged and or potentially privileged materials, is needed to preserve the sanctity of executive communications and other privileged materials. Furthermore, Movement requests that this court issue a protective order enjoining the United States from any further review of the items seized until this court can rule on the present motion. In addition, Movement requests that this court direct the United States to prepare and provide a specific and detailed receipt for property. The receipt for property provided to Movement on August 8th, 2022 is so vague and lacking in specificity that the reader does not know what was seized from Movement's home, although Movement has got a videotape of him being seized from his home. So, and of course, it's also on the record that he went through those boxes that were being removed himself at the end of 2021. So he should have a pretty good idea, except that he's, hasn't got the brain for it. But he should have a pretty good idea of what was removed, and that seems like garbage. And of course, the lack of specificity on the receipt is due to the sensitive nature of the material. You can't actually just reprint the classified documents on the receipt and give it away to everybody, because that would be a problem. It's supposed to be protected information. And then, of course, the idea of, what was it, though? That we wanted to have a special master because the government, and their reasoning for getting it was, well, the government has requested special masters before in the seizure of privileged or potentially privileged materials, so we should be able to get it too. But, and that doesn't really matter. I mean, I guess you can ask for it just the same. But of course, you should keep in mind that the reason that the government has asked for a special master that they're aware of is with, I think, the Giuliani raid. That was in order to separate truly privileged or even attorney-client privileged materials from other types of materials. And I guess to some extent, I suppose anything that Trump could attempt, I don't remember, was the search during I don't think it was during his administration. It was after his administration. So they'd need Biden's clearance on executive privilege anyway. So that probably doesn't work out. But, the use of a special master, as they say, is to preserve the sanctity of executive communications and other privileged materials, except he holds no privilege in those materials that were seized at this point. And even if there were attorney-client privilege documents in there aren't, or at least there's no claim of it, that would be subject to crime fraud exception and the various other exceptions, presumably. Certainly if it had, or you would be able to bring that question up anyway. Then there would be a job for the special master, but there isn't one now. Anyway, Marcy goes on to comment, indeed, one likely goal of this filing is to get a different judge, one who doesn't know whether Corcoran is named as a suspect on the affidavit, to force DOJ to tell everyone whether he is or not. One reason the FBI asked for more surveillance footage, which the New York Times story that doesn't mention obstruction says is part of the hunt for more classified documents, is because, what are we asking for here? Oh, yes, why do they want the surveillance footage? It's because they need to understand who caused that false filing to be filed in June and what happened in the storage area between Bratt's visit and the search. Even after the extraordinary decision by the FBI to execute a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago on August 8th, I guess this is back to the filing, investigators have sought additional surveillance footage from the club. Oh, no, this is, I think, from the New York Times article. People familiar with the matter said it was the second such demand for the club's security tapes. Right, we read that from Maggie Haberman's article. Now back to empty wheel on this. It remains true that we have no idea how narrowly or broadly the FBI scoped the probable cause of obstruction in the warrant affidavit. But what is clear is that DOJ will view both Bob and Corcoran, the latter of whom remains one of the lawyers in closest contact with Bratt, and who is the person who issued what has been viewed as a veiled threat to Merrick Garland, as either witnesses or subjects in this investigation. Targets, really. And you really can't explain the significance of that without using the word obstruction. And yet that's what both the newspapers apparently did. So, yeah, it's kind of a wild situation, to say the least. And it's not the only thing that's going on. And it's not the only place where people are wildly and for no good reason confessing to things. Let's see. We're just about up to the next break here, so we're not going to be able to cram all of this in. But let's see. I have a thread here that's been suggested to us by who sent this one? Is this Lisa? Yes, Lisa Iannucci sent this one along. As she says, hilarious thread. That, or was it not her that claimed it was hilarious? Okay, I don't want to hang that around her neck in case it turns out to be something other than hilarious. But at any rate, priceless is certainly how she put it, and we'll take a look at that thread because this one and a few others like it that I saw, even some from Marcy Wheeler, basically pointing out that all of these claims that they're making, especially even the claims of executive privilege, end up implicating the lawyers who make the claims in this strict liability crime. Again. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Now we'll get to the bottom of who claimed that this thing was hilarious. As Lisa Iannucci passed this on with the label of priceless, we find that this is a tweet from Jackie1028, which is really remarkable, and it's for reasons that will be apparent to the production staff and perhaps no one else, but it's not the one we were thinking of. The Twitter handle's actually Jackie with an IE at the end, 1028, and then an underscore, but the identifier on screen is simply Jack1028. So, anyway, inside joke for those of us here that say, chin scratcher, but not what we're here for. It is Jack's tweet that this thread that follows from Terry Canefield, whose name is not at all evocative or funny to anyone here on staff, is awesome and funny. Specifically, the comment is, awesome and funny thread explaining Trump's latest bout of legal stupidity. Let's take a look. Terry Canefield says, and Terry Canefield is a check-marked personage of some sort. Former appellate defender. Book prizes include the Jane Addams Book Award. How do you like that? My analysis has appeared in the Washington Post, NBC, and others. So, there you go. Her analysis has appeared in others. Like a possession, a demonic possession of others' bodies, I guess. All right, what does she have to say? Here's the document. There's a link to it. I don't know. It's like a 20-something page filing. It's quite weird and disturbing all by itself. But I guess we'll go with some excerpts from it instead. She says, I'll bet Trump wrote this part. There is an excerpt from the filing, which reads, President Donald J. Trump, and maybe we'll do it in this way, President Donald J. Trump is the clear front runner in the 2024 Republican presidential primary and in the 2024 general election, should he decide to run. So he declares himself the front runner. That could easily have been his attorneys, if there were any, writing in this brief. She goes on then to say, he added that his endorsement in the 2022 midterm elections was decisive for Republican candidates. I think he meant the primaries. And apparently, the FBI should have taken into account that searching his premises, searching his home would, quote, distress supporters who, he says, are most Americans. So that's a lot of what makes the filing hilarious is these sort of, visions of grandeur that Trump has about himself. And that this is really the FBI. They're trying to make the case that this is FBI election interference. And as we keep pointing out, but Trump's not running for election. Not at the moment, anyway. And even if he does run in 2024, that's 2 years away. How could it possibly be election interference? And the claim is, well, I'm making very valuable endorsements that are essential to deciding contests for Congress and governor and attorney at large and dog catcher and all the other things that we make election decisions about. I'm very popular. But he's trying to say that this is election interference because they are searching the home of a person who makes very valuable endorsements, and therefore that is election interference. Other people are running for office, but they were endorsed by a very important guy who has committed some crimes and is having his house searched, and therefore that's a bad thing. And as the excerpt reads, on August 8th, 2022, in a shockingly aggressive move and with no understanding of the distress that it would cause most Americans, roughly 24 special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, as I like to call it, directed by attorneys of the U.S. Department of Justice, the, quote, government, raided the home of President Donald J. Trump. According to the government, the agency's documents, privileged and or potentially privileged materials, and other items, including photos, handwritten notes, and even President Trump's passports that were outside the lawful reach of an already overbroad warrant, which is why they were returned, of course, almost immediately, but he doesn't have anything to say about that one. But that's the idea. One, they want to turn this into election interference, and two, this is shocking and hurtful to most of America. In other words, it's like that Simpsons. Everything's like a Simpsons episode, right? It's so bad that it would damage the town to hear it, right? Totally different context, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Okay, let's see. Next up, he's asking for a special master to go over the seized documents before they get handed to the investigators. It's probably too late. And that's worth pointing out, right? I mean, August 8th was the seizure. It is August 23rd. He, yesterday, files a motion asking for a special master to be designated. That will take a while to decide whether or not there should be a special master, and then take a little while to determine who the special master will be. And in the meantime, it's now going on, 3 weeks since the documents landed in the FBI's hands. I mean, unless you thought, and it is possible, sometimes the FBI has gone out of its way in this saga to honor his demands that his questions be credited as reasonable. So it's possible they've done nothing to go through these documents, but I doubt it, since they were in such a hurry to get them, for the government, such a hurry to get them back. But the idea that they haven't looked at them for 3 weeks, it would be very disappointing if it were the case. But it will, I think, bear on the case. The judge will say, well, you're moving for something that we award in a case where there's really big-time sensitivity and a sense of urgency. And you haven't acted with a sense of urgency here. So you haven't done anything to convince us that you're entitled to this special master being appointed. Anyway, he's just asking for a special master to go over the seized documents before they get handed to investigators, and it's too late on that. I'd assume that they've already sifted through the documents, and I'm sure they're already doing a filter and scope review. That is to say, let's separate out anything that is irrelevant or somehow otherwise privileged, and or would, as interesting as it might be, is outside the scope of our search with respect to these named crimes in the warrant. From Trump's statement of facts, let's see. Screenshot number 1. When we moved, we used boxes. We moved in the daytime and in full view. Like, okay, that's, what everybody pretty much expected you would do. But that's supposed to be evidence that they weren't hiding anything, that they moved in the daytime and used boxes. Screenshot number 2, the word movers appears 3 times in this paragraph. I am unable to puzzle out the meaning of screenshot 3. I guess I don't know. Well, let's go see what they are. Screenshot 1. From the filing, on January 20th, 2021, President Trump and his family left the White House. They moved back to their home at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida. And they talk it up here nicely, in case they're selling the real estate. Mar-a-Lago is a historic landmark, a mansion with 58 bedrooms and 33 bathrooms on 17 acres of land extending from the Atlantic Ocean to the Intracoastal Waterway, hence the name, which means sea to lake. Consistent with every modern presidential transition, staff conducted the move on a condensed time frame. No, that move, like home moves undertaken by most Americans, involved boxes. It was done during the day with the boxes in full view. I mean, the boxes mean that the papers aren't in full view, but the boxes are in full view. That's supposed to be enough for everybody. Because everybody was watching the television coverage of his move to see if he would just carry out things that said top secret on them. But instead, he put them in boxes because he's a super genius. He's Lex effing Luthor here. All right. I don't know what the talk up of Mar-a-Lago is supposed to be about, except that that's just Trump, putting the property on the market and using this as marketing materials. By the way, consistent with every modern presidential transition, staff conducted the move on a condensed time frame. Usually the time frame is from November to January, like early November to late January, November, December, January, 3 months. That's, it's, I'm sure, a big operation and there's lots of stuff moving, but it's not that condensed. And what made his move condensed has nothing about it is consistent with every modern presidential transition because, of course, he denied that there was going to be a presidential transition from early November until early January. So the better part all of 2 of the 3 months and a significant chunk of January were chewed up by his denying that there was going to be a transition. And then all of a sudden they started packing somewhere around, January 7th or so. So between the 7th and the 20th, less than 3 weeks, they did all the packing in 3 weeks that they should have done for 3 months. It has nothing to do with consistency with every modern presidential transition, but whatever. Next screen grab. After President Trump and his family settled back into their home, employees at the National Archives inquired as to whether any documents were inadvertently transferred by the movers to Mar-a-Lago. And that was just polite of them at that stage of the game to say, well, you may have inadvertently taken top secret nuclear documents. Could you give them back? In January of 2022, which is like a year later, Movement, they say, voluntarily asked NARA movers to come to Mar-a-Lago to receive 15 boxes of documents that had been brought by movers to Mar-a-Lago so that they could be transferred to NARA headquarters in Washington, D.C. They voluntarily asked them. After they were asked, would they please give them to us? They voluntarily gave them to us. It wasn't that you volunteered them. You were asked and you answered, you complied, but there's nothing, it's not, you weren't being forced against your will to give them. There was no guns involved. But voluntarily means saying, oh, look what I found. Classified material. This should really be in Washington and not here. I will call them up and say, I have a box that I probably shouldn't have and that you should have. Do you want to come get it? That's voluntarily giving up the material. Being asked to give it and complying, something different. The third screen grab, the third screen grab, which Terry says she can't make heads or tails of. Maybe we'll have better luck. Sometime thereafter, NARA employees involved in the White House and DOJ in the manner of the voluntary... All right, I've lost track already. Sometime thereafter, that's clear enough, NARA employees involved the White House and the DOJ, in the matter of the voluntarily returned 15 NARA boxes. Movement was contacted because the 15 NARA boxes contained documents from his administration that were protected by executive privilege, and Movement's counsel communicated with representatives of the White House, the DOJ, and NARA regarding these matters. Well, I mean, it's just false. None of those things are yet protected by executive privilege. You claim it, but it's not yours to give, and so what? So NARA involved the White House and the DOJ in the matter because the 15 boxes that were quote-unquote voluntarily returned after being asked for them, had classified material in it. Yeah. Nah, what else is there to know? Oh, well, you claim it's protected by executive privilege. No one else does. Movement's counsel communicated with... So then, so we claimed executive privilege and we called you to say that we're claiming it. All right. I mean, that's not unclear to me. It just doesn't do anything for him. So back to Terry. We do get the story from his viewpoint. He admits that earlier in the year, some of the documents he returned included some he believed were covered by executive privilege, which means he shouldn't have taken them. That's a good point too, right? His thinking is, well, I'm claiming executive privilege over them, which he remembers executive privilege from when he had it, when he was the executive, and it meant that things that other people wanted to get from him would instead stay with him if he asserted executive privilege over them. But one, he's no longer the executive. And two, in this case, because he's not the executive, even if executive privilege were found to be applicable here, what he's saying is, or not what he's saying, but what Terry is saying is that if the documents that he says should be subject to executive privilege are in fact subject to executive privilege, then they belong to the federal government and should never have been in his possession when he was no longer the executive. So, I mean, saying that they are covered by executive privilege is tantamount to admitting to the crime charged, the Espionage Act, which is not great or super smart, but that's what's in his own pleadings. So, gosh, I don't know what to make of that other than, the witness has rights. They, with like the courtroom scene at the end of A Few Good Men, they just admit to it. He just admitted to ordering the code red. On May 11th, he accepted the service, quote unquote, accepted service of a grand jury subpoena. And you really don't have that much choice. He determined he should search for documents bearing classified markings, even if they had been declassified. June 2nd, he invited, quote unquote, invited the FBI to retrieve, quote, responsive documents. Question: were the documents he was offering actually responsive, or were they documents that he was willing to return? Terry goes on to say, Jay Bratt and 3 FBI agents came on June 3rd. Trump greeted them in the dining room. Before leaving, President Trump's last words to Bratt and the FBI agents were as follows, quote, and this is in his filings, this is what he says he told them, "Whatever you need, just let us know." So helpful. He likes to call himself President Trump, of course, and he refers to himself all the way through that, even though he's former President Trump. So he's claiming he was so helpful to the FBI that he actually said, whatever you need, let us know, and meant it. This padlock thing, Terry says, is very strange. If he no longer retained government property, why did the unit need to be secured? The pertinent part tells me Trump is spinning this. That is, enclosed in quotes, pertinent part. He must have made reference and used those words. So I suspect they told him that he possessed documents that needed to be properly secured. The screen grab reads, on June 8th, 2022, Mr. Bratt wrote to counsel for President Trump. His letter requested, in pertinent part, that the storage room be secured. In response, President Trump directed his staff to place a second lock on the door to the storage room, and one was added. That's how you know how compliant I was, except for the part about having the documents in the first place. He thought the phone call passing along a message to Garland was so perfect that he included a transcript. It occurs to me, here is what is wrong with the special master request. He isn't supposed to have the documents in the first place, and they don't belong to him. Yes, finally. In addition, the screen grab says, counsel for President Trump asked Mr. Bratt, 1, to provide a copy of the affidavit, 2, to agree to the appointment of a special master to protect the integrity of privileged documents, 3, to provide a detailed list of exactly what was taken from President Trump's home and where it had been located in the mansion, and 4, to allow counsel to President Trump the ability to inspect what had been seized. Mr. Bratt declined these 4 requests. To end the call, counsel for President Trump requested that all on the call keep the lines of communication open so that they can be rejected in all of their ridiculous requests by the FBI. Can I have the evidence back? No, you can't. Okay. Well, that makes things weird and difficult. All right, let's see. Oh, I've got to open up another tab here on something else just to hold another story for later. Now, where were we? Right, back to the thread we were reading from Terry Canfield. If a search is conducted of a lawyer's office, a special master is appropriate because the lawyer rightfully possessed the documents and the privacy right belongs to the clients. Executive privilege belongs to the office of the presidency and not Trump. So, yes, 1, the request for a special master is inapposite because there's no material involved of the sort that special masters are usually asked to review. Usually, like we said, with the raid on Giuliani's office, a special master was there to say, all right, this is irrelevant information, not related to the case. This is related to the case, but could potentially be subject to attorney-client privilege. Let's separate this out and litigate that claim. And this here is very clearly not privileged material, but relevant to the case, and put it in a different pile. And Trump is basically saying, how come Rudy got a special master? When they raided his house, they got a special master. Why don't I get a special master? And you're not an attorney, so what would a special master be doing? He would be sorting out between executive privilege materials and others. And unfortunately, the answer is, well, to the extent that there's anything that could even remotely be considered for extension of executive privilege by the Biden administration, and not you because you're not the executive, but anything that you think even the Biden administration would recognize is covered under executive privilege. Why would it be covered under executive privilege? Because it's an important national security type document and therefore doesn't belong in your hands, and therefore you're guilty of violating the Espionage Act. If you succeed in getting any of this stuff withheld under executive privilege, it just means, well, 1, it means, okay, so fine, we won't find out what the contents of the document is, but we will see you convicted under the Espionage Act, because if you're in possession of a document that is so clearly a government document that belongs with the government and no one else, that it's subject to executive privilege, then you're guilty of violating the Espionage Act simply by having it. And I don't think he realized that. All right. Let's see. More. Plus, under the Presidential Records Act, any documents that are covered by executive privilege belong in the National Archives. Also under the PRA, the current president asserts the privilege in consultation with the former president. It's up to Biden to exert the privilege. All true. We covered this. So, he stole the documents, he has no right to exert privilege over them, and he's demanding a special master. It seems to me that the only value in reading this is entertainment value. He doesn't really get that he isn't the president anymore. This is so diluted that I can't even. He mentions, in this screen grab here, Garland's public announcement. First, He's shocked that Garland doesn't even mention his message about how to bring down the anger of his supporters. And then, this is the good part, we have this, the screen grab. And I guess the highlighted part is this. But it begins, Attorney General Merrick Garland's press conference just hours after this August 11th phone call. Attorney General Merrick Garland took the unusual step of holding a press conference to deliver remarks regarding the search of Mar-a-Lago and the government's motion to unseal the search warrant and receipt for property. The highlighted part begins here. Mr. Garland made no mention of President Trump's clear and unequivocal message to him. And why should he? In fact, the government made no response at all to President Trump's invitation to help reduce public consternation with the government after the raid. Instead, Mr. Garland stated in pertinent part the following in an excerpt from his speech. But what's important about this screen grab is Trump is trying to claim credit of some sort, and he's sad that Garland didn't give him credit for offering to take down the temperature, even though it wasn't a serious offer, and Garland has no reason to pass that on to people, and Trump has no problem reaching an audience if he wants to. And there's no real reason why the current Attorney General should do him that service. All right, let's see. He mentions again how he's the front runner in 2024, and the only possible conclusion from Garland's speech is that the decision to search Mar-a-Lago was to diminish the, quote, leading voice in the Republican Party, President Trump. Actually, I'm no longer entertained by the idiocy, Terry adds here. Yeah, so this is him trying to paint the whole thing as political. This entire motion is for the court of right-wing consumption, she says. He is offering up talking points. He is signaling what his defenders are supposed to say. He makes an overbroad argument, which has nothing to do with the privilege review. That's for a motion to suppress evidence. And then he says that violating the Presidential Records Act is not a crime, so he shouldn't have been searched. But the PRA wasn't one of the statutes he's accused of violating. Of course, it was the Espionage Act, and definitely violating that is probably still a crime. His lawyers are a bit confused. Here, the motion is talking about why the evidence should be suppressed. But a motion to suppress is a pre-trial motion, not this sort of, we're not even at pre-trial at this point. Next comes the everyone is unfair to me argument. So let's see what he's got here. In this section of the filing, the government's reckless pursuit of a search warrant implicates well-established bases for suppression under the Fourth Amendment. Under controlling Supreme Court precedent, a search warrant violates a person's Fourth Amendment rights and is invalid if the affiant either makes material misstatements or makes a material omission in the affidavit. I mean, that's true, but no one has yet alleged either of those things about the affidavit because you haven't seen it. Did the DOJ mischaracterize or omit from its affidavit the true extent of the president's cooperation? Press reports by anonymous government sources raise this question. What? No, not really. I mean, I guess it's an interesting thought. It's a theory. There's nothing that establishes that it's any more likely to be true than not. But that's something you can argue in pretrial motions. It's just not applicable yet. They haven't decided. No one has made any motion to bring anything as evidence, so there's no evidence for you to suppress at this point. You probably thought I was kidding, right? Nope. That's an actual heading. In the paragraph that follows, he mentions Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, one of his favorite talking points, right? And now I'm beginning to be called away from Twitter. More later, and we'll continue with this. And there's no interruption in her thread. What's the header here? The government has long treated President Donald J. Trump unfairly. Oh, that definitely deserves a sad trombone for sure. The FBI and DOJ have demonstrated a willingness to treat President Trump differently than any other citizen. 2 years of noisy, quote, Russian collusion investigations led to a special counsel's finding of biased FBI agents and officials. Stories of FBI agents engaging in, and it doesn't even matter what they were engaging in. These are all his usual claims. Let's see. Oh, she says, I attached the wrong screenshot earlier. I meant to show you the transcript of another perfect call. The main reason this was a stupid filing is that the government will respond and take him apart. They have good lawyers over there at the DOJ. And I guess the screenshot that was supposed to be here, the message was as follows. President Trump wants the Attorney General to know that he has been hearing from people all over the country about the raid. Yeah, sure. If there was one word to describe their mood, because that's how many words I can think of, it is angry. The heat is building up. The pressure is building up. Whatever I can do, oh, this should all be in Trump's voice, to take the heat down, to bring the pressure down, just let us know. Not a serious offer, of course, but he was very disturbed that Merrick Garland didn't read that message into the record. Not that he had any obligation to, or not that it means anything. Anyway, Terry continues here. Now I'm up to the part where he says that he needs a special master to protect his constitutional rights. But that's not what special masters do. He's conflating everything, executive privilege with his Fourth Amendment rights to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, right? That's where the constitutional rights come into it, the Fourth Amendment. But a special master just looks at executive privilege, not a constitutional right per se. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and more frogs creeping into the throat during the 2-minute break here. There's a bit more, believe it or not, to Terry Canefield's review, but this is probably the easiest way to get through the entirety of the filing without reading it ourselves. She digests most of the funnier parts for us. Let's see, where we left off. I was interested in this part here where he is now conflating his own, the Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable search and seizures and the executive privilege claim, like that it's somehow part and parcel of the Fourth Amendment. He conflates them because the Fourth Amendment can, of course, be invoked to exclude evidence from trial, from being used against you. And executive privilege is something that he has used in the past to exclude something from evidence too. And so they're both about evidence. And so therefore both constitutional rights and should all be litigated in the same motion. And probably not. But yeah, he's making this claim. How does he put it here? This court should appoint a special master to protect movements' constitutional rights. Though, again, that's not what they typically do. Movement requests that this court appoint a special master pursuant to Rule 53A1B of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure and this court's inherent equitable powers and authority, which is something that you include in case the 53A1B is somehow inapplicable, they find, and it doesn't really argue for the appointment of a special master. But you have some other... If you can come up with some other reason why you think, well, a special master should be appointed anyway, and I don't know if it's ever been appointed on grounds other than 53A1B, but in case you can think of any, it's therefore covered. We've made the request pursuant to the rule and anything else you can think of. The court's inherent equitable powers and authority, I guess, is how you style that in lawyer speak. This step, which the government itself has requested in cases involving the seizure of privileged and or potentially privileged materials, not Fourth Amendment materials, but privilege, is needed to preserve the sanctity of the executive communications and other privileged materials. So this is like the equivalent of saying, I don't have to pay for this chocolate bar because I've been told it's a free country, and in a free country, stuff is free, and I don't have to pay. Or that Twitter banned me, and that is therefore a violation of my First Amendment rights, which you don't have as against Twitter, but against the government. That sort of level of childlike conflation. Among the reasons he gives for why a filter team is inadequate is that the public won't trust it. And do we know, everybody, what the filter team is? I mean, remember, he's asking for a special master to be appointed to sift through the material and say, this is privileged and can't be used, this is irrelevant and can't be used, and this is, whatever else. And this is something that, okay, might be relevant to the case. Fine, let it through. It is a function currently being performed by these FBI filter teams. They get another team of agents who don't work on the case that's being brought with this evidence to sift through it and say, all right, this is relevant to the case and should be seen now by the lawyers who are, in fact, prosecuting this case. And this is irrelevant and nobody else should see it, and return it. Send it back to Mar-a-Lago. And now the team that's actually doing the prosecution, the theory here is, one, they get only material that's relevant and that they're entitled to get. And two, that they are in no way tainted by having accidentally seen material to which they are not entitled, and which might have nothing whatsoever to do with the case, but might otherwise somehow, prejudice them against somebody about, who's mentioned in the papers or something like that. Which, by the way, they didn't bother to do when Evan Corcoran went rifling through the papers. He was not a filter team. He's representing Trump on the case and looking at materials to which he's not entitled to view because he lacks the national security clearance for it. But anyway, remember that a filter team is in place, but he says there needs to be a special master instead of the filter team because people won't trust the FBI to do the filtering correctly because I say that the FBI sucks. Yeah, so, Your Honor, you have to make special rules for me or the public won't like it. That's not how this works. The actual pleading, as a general matter, given the circumstances here, a taint team is insufficient. That's the filter team. The less preferred lingo for it, a taint team, for obvious reasons. Anyway, the appearance of justice must be served as well as the interests of justice, he's quoting here. It is a great leap of faith to expect that members of the general public would believe that any such Chinese wall, as they used to call it, would be impenetrable, notwithstanding the honor of an, in this case, assistant United States attorney, quoting from earlier cases, but hey, basically trying to say the courts in the past have recognized that people won't always trust the FBI for this. Well, they might not, but that's the usual first resort here. He says that merely adequate safeguards, are not enough because this search has, quote, captured the attention of the American public. And how did that happen, Terry asks? Because, of course, Trump made sure everyone knew about it and talked about it. So this is the claim. This matter has captured the attention of the American public. Merely adequate safeguards are not acceptable when the matter at hand involves not only the constitutional rights of President Trump, which it does not, but also the preservation of executive privilege. Movement submits that the appointment of a special master is the only appropriate action, and for it to have any meaning at all, a protective order should issue ordering the United States to cease review of the seized materials. I guess the word materials is cut off here. It could be any other word, but you get the idea. I mean, if it's adequate, it's adequate. But only merely adequate? No. That's not adequate. Well, then it's not adequate, is it? All right. Well, whatever. File this one under be careful what you wish for. He wants everyone to know specifically which documents he stole. I have read some weird court filings. This was definitely the weirdest. This part reads, the government must provide an informative receipt for property. Rule 41F of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. He's switched bodies of rules here, requires that law enforcement leave a receipt for property with the person for whom the items were seized at the location of the search. Let's see. Rule also states inventory. An officer present during the execution of a warrant must prepare and verify an inventory of any property seized, which they did. But he's saying it should be more detailed. But based on what? Nothing in particular. And, of course, as she says, be careful what you wish for. If it lists, nuclear documents, then everyone will say, oh, he is guilty after all. That's weird. Why would he release that information? Even if he gets what he's asking for, it won't help him. The FBI has the evidence. He's trying to suppress the evidence. When defendants have no defenses, that's what they try to do. It only succeeds if the government screws up, and they didn't. So, if the government screws up and violates a person's rights with an illegal search or seizure, the remedy is that the defendant files a motion to suppress under the exclusionary rule. Evidence obtained in violation of a defendant's rights can't be used in court. In contrast, the special master is just the person who carries out an action on behalf of the court. Trump is also trying to raise a political persecution defense, even though defenses are for trials. See how he's smushing everything together? So let's see. Here's a link from Cornell Law School about what special masters are and what they do. So the motion is a silly request for a special master, a motion to suppress, which is supposed to happen pre-trial, and a lame political persecution defense, which is also supposed to be raised at trial, all smushed together. I just looked over this thread, she says. I assert 3 defenses for all typing errors, so don't worry about those. Initially, the docket, this part showed pro se, but then the lawyers were added. But all highly irregular. There is no declaration supporting the facts. That's true. Which could be just because they know that they don't know what they're doing here. So that's actually the end of the thread, and it was kind of interesting and an easy way to take apart all of the incredibly dumb things that happen in the filing. There is, of course, more to be read about it, and a lot of that comes from Empty Wheel in another thread about this stuff. Her summary is, I think, much quicker here. Here it is. Donnie, the summary of all of what's going on in the filing. Donnie promised us a, quote, very significant Fourth Amendment filing, but instead gave us a flimsy 2-week late special master request that conflates attorney-client privilege and executive privilege and admitted to threatening the attorney general. So, okay, that's not so smart. She also notes that it's no longer a pro se filing. I forget whether Halligan, I guess, is now the counsel of record. I forget whether Halligan is the garage lawyer, the parking garage one, or something else. It's the insurance lawyer putting her name to what might be Kash Patel's idiotic claims that one can get a special master for executive privilege claims over documents stolen from the U.S. government. This whole motion, I guess, for a special master comes at Kash Patel's urging. Not that he's a lawyer or anything. Also, let's see, she includes a tweet from Ben Vernia, who says, I'm not sure if you've covered this, but where did they get off saying that the served the U.S. via email? What? I guess in their motion. Had they filed it in the original magistrate judge matter, it would have been CM/ECF serve, but they created a new civil matter for it, for which you can't serve the U.S. by email. So they might not even have served their motion correctly. So interesting. And then Donald Trump, I guess, Truth Social message saying, we have just filed a motion in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida, strongly asserting my rights, including under the Fourth Amendment of our Constitution, regarding the unnecessary, unwarranted, it's a warrant. I mean, it's like literally was warranted, but he's saying it was unwarranted and un-American break-in by dozens of FBI agents and others of my home, Mar-a-Lago, in Palm Beach, Florida. Okay, sure, whatever. So, Yeah, I mean, that's kind of ridiculous. It was unwarranted. It literally was warranted. And of course, it was done in plain clothes and it didn't break in, and they notified the Secret Service ahead of time, and they waited until he was out of town, and they let him watch on closed circuit TV. Just imagine what they could do to you if they serve warrants this way on the next president. Except it's quite a nice way of getting a warrant served, honestly. I think this is right. She's now including Andrew Weissman's tweet. The tweet reads, the new Trump Florida filing opens a wide door for DOJ to walk through. Attorney General Garland can now, quote, speak in his filings and address all the factual lies and misrepresentations. She says, I think this is right, starting with naming Corcoran and Bob as either conflicted attorneys or potential co-conspirators in obstruction. I think that's what Trump has avoided this thus far, and why this current motion only asks for a special master for executive privilege, not attorney-client materials. I don't know if there were any attorney-client materials in there, but okay. And Pope Hat chimes in here and is quoted by Empty Wheel. Pope Hat speaks of magic that Trump's lawyers don't have, like criminal procedure. Trump Hat's tweet says, also, when I file a motion, I use a weird trick. I identify the rule or statute I'm invoking that gives the court power to act and the rules governing the process. In criminal cases, I cite criminal rules and cases. But apparently, as we pointed out, not done in his filing, and he mixed the two as well. Federal rules of criminal procedure for exclusionary stuff and federal rules of civil procedure for the special master issue. It's all kind of a mishmash. This is part of a longer Pope Hat thread. Is it relevant and worthy and short enough to be included? Let's see. Let's see. His view of this stuff. Last time we had attorney-client privilege documents seized from a client, we were in court to contest it that day. 2 weeks later is, a bit of a delay here. Also, if I did take 2 weeks to file it, with the greatest respect, it wouldn't look like this. This is just bad. Also, when I file a motion, right, the weird trick, actually citing rules and the right ones at that. Finally, I think it's fair to say that I don't have a lot of shame, but I have enough that I wouldn't file a motion arguing that my client took an official legal position the court should have noticed on Truth Social. Trump's motion attempts the you hid from the judge that we cooperated fully and gave you all the documents marked secret before you came back with a warrant and took the documents marked secret that we didn't give you. You hid that from the court. They didn't stick this landing here. I mean, this is, we'll say, crappy on every level. It's crappy strategy, crappy lawyering, crappy writing, crappy organization. It's even crappy as propaganda. It's just incompetent. Seriously, though, if an associate drafted this motion, I wouldn't fire them. That would be cruel. I would kill them and then dump their body in that service elevator lobby where we leave boxes sometimes. It's just that bad, I guess, is what they're saying. Let's see. So I think that's it for Empty Wheel's quick view of this thing. Now, another direction, sort of, that we could go here is, there's this reading from the New York Times, which an opinion piece in the New York Times from Garrett Graff, a historian, the author of Watergate, A New History, at any rate, who writes this piece for the New York Times. Trump is going after one of the most conservative institutions in the U.S. government. This idea of attacking the FBI as a woke organization that's out to get him because he's Trump and they're woke is absurd on its face. And Garrett does a pretty good job of explaining why. Of all the weird and historically discordant moments and news stories of the Donald Trump era, few seem stranger than watching the former president and his allies demonize the FBI as some sort of rogue, woke, democratic deep state mob. This has been happening for several years now, but in the days since the FBI searched Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago, the Bureau has attracted particularly withering criticism for its supposedly leftist persecution of Trump, and Republicans have even begun to call to defund the corrupt FBI, as they put it. Historically, though, the FBI has been arguably the most culturally conservative and traditionally white Christian institution in the entire U.S. government. Somebody else pointed out the other day, I believe there's never been a Democrat appointed as director of the FBI in its entire history. I mean, of course, J. Edgar Hoover was the director for most of its history. And then since then, Republicans have appointed the directors, and those directors have either been held over in their 10-year terms by Democrats, or Democrats have been cajoled into, appeasing the right by appointing Republicans as directors. Anyway, the article here from Garrett goes on. Historically, the FBI, of course, most culturally conservative, etc., and even says traditionally white Christian institution in the government. It's an institution so culturally conservative, even by the standards of law enforcement, that Democratic presidents have never felt comfortable or politically emboldened enough to nominate a Democrat to head the Bureau. That's right. Far from being a bastion of progressive thinking, every single director of the FBI has been a Republican-aligned official, going all the way back to its creation. Such history suggests that the issue here is Mr. Trump and not institutional bias. Its current director, Christopher Wray, who oversaw the agents conducting last week's search of Mar-a-Lago, was, of course, nominated by Mr. Trump himself and came to the job with sterling Republican credentials. He was the head of the criminal division in George W. Bush's Justice Department, a member of the Conservative Federalist Society, and a clerk for Judge J. Michael Luttig, a Republican judicial icon. Mr. Wray replaced the FBI director Mr. Trump fired, James Comey, who himself had been nominated by Barack Obama, but was the former Deputy Attorney General of George W. Bush's Justice Department. His predecessor, Robert Mueller, who served in the Justice Department for both Bush presidencies, was nominated by George W. Bush. And before them, from Louis Freeh, a George H.W. Bush judge, to the FBI's founder, J. Edgar Hoover, all of the FBI's directors were Republican-aligned officials. That political conservatism in the Bureau's ranks traces back to the culture that Hoover cultivated for half a century when the Bureau viewed its role as policing and protecting a uniquely conservative and Christian view of the United States. The irony of Donald Trump and Republicans demonizing the FBI is that over the course of its century-plus existence, the Bureau has actually stood as one of America's cultural bulwarks, protecting the nation from, quote, radicals and subversives who sought to diversify the United States beyond its traditional white male Christian power structure. Hoover seemed to fight his entire life to preserve this unique mom, baseball, and apple pie nostalgia that would crystallize around the Leave It to Beaver idyll of the 1950s. Hoover started the Justice Department as the head of the anti-radical division in 1919, and for decades he treated black writers and artists as subversives. The Bureau compiled an 1,884-page report on James Baldwin. Its COINTEL programs under Hoover and the FBI head of domestic intelligence, William Sullivan, targeted and surveilled civil rights leaders like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The FBI fretted over John Lennon and the Beatles and sought to arrest Lennon on narcotics charges, which it hoped would lead to his deportation from the United States. And Hoover turned down a desired meeting with Elvis Presley days after Richard Nixon's bizarre White House photo with the rock legend, after a Hoover aide noted that Presley was wearing his hair down to his shoulders and indulges in the wearing of all sorts of exotic dress. With the FBI's troubled history with race and ethnicity, it's perhaps not surprising that the Bureau's agent corps remains nearly three-quarters white and overwhelmingly male. As much as Mr. Trump's backers tried to tar the Bureau by pointing to critical anti-Trump text messages between the FBI agent Peter Strzok and the lawyer Lisa Page, the former president has apparently benefited from its conservative agent ranks. Comey and Bureau executives have said it was anti-Clinton agents in the New York field office leaking information that pressured them to release public news about the discovery of new emails pertaining to Hillary Clinton in October of 2016. The FBI is Trumpland, one agent told The Guardian in the days before the election. Given such a history, it seems that the president has no one to blame but himself for the fact that today he and his supporters are in such heated conflict with the FBI. Beyond an attack on the FBI's Cincinnati office earlier this month, which was carried out by a supporter of Mr. Trump's, who was also present at the Capitol attack on January 6th, armed Trump supporters have also protested outside of an FBI field office in Phoenix. These were his people, and he's the one whose suspicious behavior keeps attracting the Bureau's attention. For the Bureau itself, its three most recent directors have made big pushes and failed to recruit a more diverse workforce that better reflects the country it serves. Mr. Comey was actually at a minority recruiting event in Los Angeles in 2017 when he learned from TV reports that Mr. Trump had fired him and then tried to deny him the use of the agency's plane to get back, right? It appointed its first ever chief diversity officer in 2021. Scott McMillan is his name. It's McMillian, not McMillan, but with an I in there. Amid the furor over racially biased policing following the murder of George Floyd. Mr. McMillan, a Bureau veteran of over 2 decades who was the only black agent in his training class at Quantico Academy in 1997, noted that the ranks of the Bureau's black agents have never risen above 6%. It has long battled racial and sexual discrimination lawsuits. By at least one measure, the Bureau remains the least woke corps of federal agents. It now stands as the last and only one of the top dozen federal law enforcement agencies, among them Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Border Patrol, Drug Enforcement Administration, Secret Service, and the Park Police, that has never had a woman or person of color lead the agency. So, tough sell, but not to his supporters, of course. They'll just believe whatever he has to say. But tough sell to the rest of us and other normal people who can discern the BS in all of this. Let's see. Oh, as Greg might say, for instance.
Bullshit.
It's exactly true. And by the way, Greg hasn't said this in a while, but it's also still true.
Oh my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks.
That would be a very long clip if I used the Aruga horn on every single one of those things. Okay, so speaking of inadvertent confessions, as we were earlier in the show, we'll try and squeeze this last one in from HuffPost. Ed Mazza reports this one. Eric Trump's accidental confession about his father has Twitter users howling. Did he really mean to say this out loud? Let's figure out what this is. This goes back to August 10th, I guess. So right after the raid, but let's see what it's about. Eric Trump may have revealed just a little too much about how the White House operated under his father. Oh yes, this is very interesting, I thought. One day after the FBI executed a search warrant on Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home, the son of the former president claimed that President Joe Biden must have approved the action. You know, he said he didn't know anything about it and he was separated from it and he just let the DOJ do its thing, right? He was informed, I'm sure, after the fact. But he didn't know anything about it ahead of time and didn't order the search himself. But Eric Trump says that can't be true. His reasoning? Because that's how it worked when Trump was in office. Here's a clip from Fox News that ASIN is circulating. Eric Trump saying, "I know the White House as well as anyone. I know the system. This did not happen without Joe Biden's explicit approval." Now, most modern presidents have taken pains to distance themselves from Justice Department operations with political implications. In this case, the White House said Biden found out about the search warrant the same way everyone else did, from the news. But as Twitter users were quick to point out, Eric Trump's comments appeared to admit that that wasn't the case, for some strange reason, in the Trump White House. This is Midas Touch, with a similar clip noting, "This actually may be a confession that Donald Trump attempted to wield power over the Department of Justice in inappropriate ways. Eric is making things a whole lot worse for his family every time he opens his mouth." Molly Jong Fast commenting on the same bit of video here. I mean, that might be how it worked in the Trump White House, but that's not supposed to be how it works. Others have the same or similar sentiments. Gary Whitta pointing out Fail's son inadvertently admitting that his dad ran a corrupt White House. Others saying Eric doesn't understand that just because that's how it worked in the Trump White House doesn't mean that's how it usually works or is how it's supposed to be how it works. Cliff Schechter, everyone's good pal Cliff Schechter, saying, so unintentionally telling. You see, Gumbo, that's how it worked in the Trump White House when your dad, Cheeto Jabba, gurgled and slowed and lounged his way through the place. That is not, in fact, how it works in a normal White House. John Aravosis, similar sentiments. Victoria Brownworth chiming in. Jory Rand. Everybody seems to notice that this is the case. Jesse LaGreca, bringing back our favorite saying about the Trump folks. Every accusation is a confession. And that brings us to the end of today's show. And time now to hand things over, of course, to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. But things not getting a whole lot better for Trump and others in Trump land. And where this special master filing goes, I don't know. Marcy points out that this is a great opportunity, though, for Garland to respond, although I guess he could conceivably ignore the filing entirely if they haven't been properly served with notice of the motion, but eventually I'm sure they'll get wind of the motion and respond, and I guess they'll rather surgically take the whole thing apart. I hope that they don't go out of their way to say, well, fine, we'll have a special master even though there's nothing for a special master to do, just to satisfy you that we're not overly aggressive in our prosecution of this case. But anyway, it would be a huge waste of time and a huge waste of money if they were to do that. Plenty of other things, of course, for the wrap balance of the week that we should get to. And, we still got to keep an eye on Thursday here to see how we're going to handle this thing with the first day of school with a new delayed schedule for the high schoolers here. That means that departure time for the bus and or missing the bus is like dead on with the start of the show. We really have to give that some consideration how we're going to handle that for the rest of the year. But we'll muddle through for this week anyway.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Justice Putnam, as I mentioned, is next. Look at this collection of stories he's got on tap for you. New polls show majorities of Americans want stricter gun laws. Yes, we've heard that. And how about this one? After enduring continuous harassment, the entire election staff of a rural Texas county has abruptly quit 70 days before an election. Sounds like trouble. Stay tuned.